Hello and welcome back to Ticker Talks, and yes, it is time to talk. But first up, I would like to acknowledge that this segment is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and I pay my respect to elders both past, present and future. Now, the team at Polaron International Group are using their expertise, networks and systems to empower people and organisations by connecting them through language, which is a very exciting prospect. And I have Eva Hussein joining me each week, Director of Polaron. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Doing very well. How are you today?
Really good, although it's a bit of a rainy day, but we're doing well as we can in lockdown.
Exactly right. Now, I understand Polaron had a very successful forum last week. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can indeed. So the forum was a community forum where we asked people how they wanted their translations or language services presented to them. So we had around 60 people attend, ranging from interpreters, translators, bicultural workers, bilingual educators, but also our clients and the government. So we had a panel discussion with educators and a representative from Victoria Multicultural Commission, Tina Hosseini, and also NATI, which is the National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters. We had Aurelie Sheehan from there, and RMIT educator Erica Gonzalez, who's also the head of OSIT, which is the professional association. So look, the reason that the forum was really successful, I think, in my mind anyway, is that we managed to get people on the same page when it comes to communication in the multicultural space. You think that it's easy, but it's not, because we work, in unprecedented times, as they say, and we're doing a lot of communication, but not all of it is effective. So we looked at how do we work together across the board, how do we make our communication more effective for the communities that we're aiming to communicate with.
Fantastic. Now, I understand following on from this forum, you guys will be generating an impact report about community engagement. Can you take us through a bit about what that entails?
Sure. So look, I think it's a big issue. Communication with diverse communities is a big issue. It's often the last thing that organizations think of. And what do they say, Mike? If you want to eat an elephant, you need to chunk it or have one bite at a time. So this is our approach. We decided that we will do something little to get the conversation started. And impact report is one of those things that we can do within our means. And I think when we finish the survey, so we are currently running a survey of all different stakeholders. That impact report will inform the way that we do things, but also will get that conversation going amongst the community so that people understand that when we translate, it's not just for the sake of putting something on a website and hoping for the best that people will find it. It's more about engaging people that this resources are for.
Really targeting that engagement and making sure that people get the message, which is really important. So I understand you wanted to talk about youth perspectives, speaking of engagement in that context and diversity and inclusion. Can you tell us a bit about who we're going to meet today on today's episode?
For sure. So we're going to speak to Div Pillay and Rana Ebrahimi. Both are very accomplished in this space. And just like me, they're not young. I hope they don't mind me saying so, but they've been working in youth work for a long time. And the issues are the same as they ever have been, actually. So, I came to Australia at the age of 18 and I considered, I was a refugee and I was a young person. But I think some of the discussions and conversations we're having are still focused on how do we enable young people to be part of the community in the most effective way, and one that helps them achieve their best.
Introducing our main speakers for today, we have Rana Ebrahimi, National Manager at Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network, and Div Pillay, founder of MindTribes and Cultural Inclusion Specialist. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining Eva and I.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
No worries. Now, you both bring a really unique perspective to this conversation, having worked with young people from diverse backgrounds before. What are some of the challenges that young people are experiencing right now? And Div, I'll let you start.
Well, I always ask the question, which young people are you really talking about? So, I often ask young people the question, where do they live? where do they work and where do they study? And from that, you can answer your question more effectively, because then you understand the challenges that they're facing now. And I would say more broadly, the challenges are from a mental health perspective, from an employment and accessing employment opportunities, and from a financial stability perspective. And when you dig deeper into the demographic of who those youth are, you'll get to understand the extent of that mental health, employment, and financial situation a bit better.
Yeah, and Rana, what about you? Thoughts and feelings?
Say that MION is an Australia's national peak body on multicultural youth issues, and we are working with young people from age 12 to 25 from migrant and refugee backgrounds. So if I want to say what are these people's experiences, I should talk about the impact of the COVID pandemic, that it has multiple and intersecting impacts on young people. As Div said, employment for young people heavily impacted by lockdown.
Rana, you painted a very sort of almost grim picture there. Div, are there any solutions that you guys can come up with maybe that need to be addressed in the immediate future to help resolve some of these problems?
Well, I would say what we're seeing working in the market, especially when we work with international students a lot. And so in Victoria, where I'm from, 1 in 8 in our multicultural youth community is an international student. So here, young people are quite displaced and isolated from their home countries. And from a solutions perspective, what we're seeing is actually involving multicultural youth in the solution design, because a lot of the services that Rana spoke about are really very Western context driven. If you call the hotlines, Beyond Blue, Lifeline, when you call human rights, the hotline to report racism, you will likely get somebody who is quite culturally different from that young person. And so the cultural responsiveness is really important. But what we're seeing happening more and more is that young people are getting involved in the design of those services. Their voices are being heard, which is a positive sign. And it's just about also representation. So a lot of the comms divisions which design those outreach programs need to also be representative of the people that they're serving, not just involving them anecdotally in 1 or 2 projects. It needs to be a long-term kind of representation of at least people of colour to start off with. So we're starting to see a little shift, but it isn't systemic enough to the rapid response that we need, especially arising from COVID.
Well, according to the ABS, I should say, an estimated 3.3 million young people aged 15 to 24 roughly live in Australia, which is around 13% of the population. So it strikes me as so bizarre that those people can't pick up the phone and engage with services in a meaningful way to get the help they need. We know that being healthy during the younger years helps establish strong foundations for the future well-being. What are some of the initiatives, Rana, that you've been involved with that have helped young Australians stay physically and mentally healthy as well?
That's a really good question. I should say that, as Div mentioned, it's really need to be highlighted that we need young people to be directly involved in these initiatives. So we try to bring them in and co-design the processes with them. It's not just designing or consulting with young people. They should be involved in the implementation, in the life cycle of the projects. We are trying to start and to manage some initiatives to bring in young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds to mental health sector, and develop some opportunities for them to capacity build and get the traineeships and the capacity to be involved. Then they can be the cultural brokers, and they can facilitate this relationship between the mainstream services and the culturally appropriate services. And that's what we want to do. And also we are working with Department of Health closely to bring the young people's voice to the messaging and the communication they are going to design. So it's really important. It's a cohort of this population to be to have the image of their community and their people, and unfortunately it's not happening everywhere. We all have seen the Channel 9 advertisement that there's no picture of people of color in that, and not even young people from Australia. So it's really important to bring this picture and share that we are all living in Australia. We are all somehow Australian. So we need to paint this diverse picture as well.
Just can I comment on just from a behavioral understanding of what physically healthy and mentally healthy means? What I do find is that, you know, generationally, from a culturally diverse background, mental health has a massive stigma to it in the first place. And when we interviewed a number of international students on a project that we were running, they almost saw reaching out to a service at a very extreme level. So when describing what mental health meant to them, it meant that it was a critical incident, almost like, you know, when people would commit suicide, that's when you needed to reach out. So they're not really understanding that, you know, taking care of yourself is not something selfish. Culturally and generationally, they don't see their parents looking after their mental health. They don't see, you know, physical and, you know, eating healthy and exercising as a key priority. The focus on coming to Australia and building a new life is very much around, you know, getting your academics up, getting your, you know, your financial stability up, and that sort of is counterplayed with looking after yourself. So it's a detriment to health and healthy living. And as much as, you know, the government can push out messaging to you know, just talk about looking after yourself physically, eating right, exercising, those messages are not really a key priority in a migrant or refugee or asylum seeker's life. When you think about, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you think about what's really important, you know, that is really the last on the priority list. So unless it gets, you know, critically, you know, important to look after it in terms of there's a massive risk to someone, you know, taking their own life or thinking about it, at least that's when I think an intervention might work. But I think it's rewiring and reconnecting with people about what does this actually mean, looking after yourself, and what does self-care mean, because we just find that that's not a message that's well understood in this culturally and linguistically diverse community. So there's just a difference in the connection of the messages and what it actually translates to in someone's life. So I think that's important. You know, what does it mean, and how do you access the service?
Div, I'm going to have to wrap us up there. We're running out of time, unfortunately.
Look, there were so many important points. For me, what resonated both from Rana and the other speaker, Pillay, was that we do need to look at the youth or any other sector of the community as people and really engage with them, and not only ask them what they think, but find a way of implementing those initiatives or those ideas that they have, because that's the disconnect. That's what's missing from the picture.
Do you want to touch on miscommunication of the week? Speaking of what's missing from the picture, this one was quite interesting, you brought to my attention today.
The news headlines that we sometimes read develop very fast, and, you know, the news cycle has become so super fast, I guess, in today's day and age, that we maybe don't have time to check what something reads. So this particular one that you'll be seeing on the screen talks about Melbourne psychic, and that can, of course, be understood two different ways. We do hope that there is not a Melbourne psychic who's struggling in particular, so somebody who's a fortune teller. But I think, you know, when you read headlines like that, you can get very, very confused.
Of course, and that puts the impetus on people being able to communicate clearly and properly. Eva, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, and see you next week.
See you next week. Now, if you have any questions about how to reach your multicultural audiences, get in touch with the team at Polaron, www.polaron.com.au. Titles are on the screen there. I'm Mike Loder, and thank you so much for your time.